Thank you for that warm welcome, everybody. It's good to be here. And I just want to say a couple of things right off the bat. I love that you open the meeting with not just the pledge and the prayer, but the Madison Minute. Is that every meeting we do this? Yes. I love that because one of the things is we just talk about the importance of talking about history without actually just talking about our history. Right? We take the moment to actually do it. I so appreciate that. I so respect. I think, you know what, Jake? I think we're going to do that at every. Do you mind if we just take that tradition and spread it? I want to do that at every event from here on out, and we will recognize Moms for Liberty when we do. Thank you. Can I take this? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think there's some connection I feel like I've had with this organization for a long time. I'm the first millennial candidate ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. Thank you. And I'm a father, and I'm a parent of two young sons. If luck will have it, if they finish their bath in time, they're going to be joining us in just a little bit. But I think it's something about that made it not a coincidence that I was also the first presidential candidate in this race to sign the Moms for Liberty pledge. It was the easiest pledge I've ever signed. You guys are like, it's like the equivalent of the founding fathers. I'm not kidding when I say this. When one of the things they did when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is that they made it simple. This is simple in that it's not complex, but it is hard in that it is not easy. Right? Because it takes courage. We say courage is contagious. Our founding fathers' courage was contagious across generations. Yeah. Okay, I think your courage here is contagious across ours. And I think whoever wrote that in this organization, I'm sure it was a group of you across the country, you made it easy for me to, in the first thing you're supposed to do with these pledges you get is, okay, you run them through, make sure you run the traps, frozen, because you can't unsign it once you've signed it, right? So I've been coached. I'm not a politician. I started my career in business, but I was coached well. This is what they do. Right? They'll give you that pledge. Wait, take it back. I just read this one, and then I read it again, and then I read it a third time, and I just said, I agree with everything in here. We're just going to sign it on the spot. So that's what we did. And so congratulations to your framers for doing that. Thank you. So I want to talk to you about where we are in our journey as Americans, as a country. Where are we right now? I think we're in the middle of a national identity crisis, actually. I'll tell you about it from my generation's perspective in particular. I'm a millennial, like I said. I was born in 1985. I'm 37 years old. The thing about us is that we're hungry for a cause. We're hungry for purpose and meaning and identity at a point in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. Yeah. Okay, that leaves a moral vacuum in its wake. Yeah. And then when you have that black hole that runs so deep, that is when poison begins to fill the void. Hence the rise of fill in the blank. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism. You think it's a coincidence that we see the rise of these same cults at the same time? That's not a coincidence. It's a symptom of our deeper hunger. Right? We're like the Israelites, lost in the desert. You want to know, I said this yesterday to a religious group. I'll say it to this group today. When the Israelites left the desert, when they left Pharaoh and they're lost in the desert, what did they say? They said, we want to go back and be ruled by Pharaoh. Why? Because if you don't bend the knee to God, I can think the same goes for country. You're going to bend the knee to something. Mm-hmm. Yep. You're just not going to know you're doing it. Yep. We have a mental health epidemic raging across our country like wildfire, especially in that next generation, my kids' generation. Depression. Loss of self-confidence, anxiety. Why is it? We hunger to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Yet we can't even answer what it means to be an American today. That's the question of our time. What does it mean to be an American? I think being an American means you believe in the ideals that set this country into motion. And that's the special thing about being an American. The thing that separates us here in this room, us human beings, from beasts, from animals, is that we can believe in something greater than ourselves, that we can believe in ideals. Okay? So if you think about it that way, America was founded on the very thing that makes us human. It's founded on our humanity. You know, most nations through human history, they weren't like us. They were founded on the basis of a common identity. Maybe it's a genetic identity. Maybe it's their language, a common religion, or a monarch, or a food. America isn't one of those countries. America was founded on a set of ideals that brought together a divided, headstrong group of people 250 years ago, okay? So we live today, I think, in one of those moments, a 1776 moment, where we owe it to ourselves to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be American? You ask somebody my age that question, just try it for yourself. You get a blank stare in response. Okay, that blank stare is the problem. So we're going to answer that question. What does it mean to be American? It means you believe in basic ideas, like the pursuit of excellence and merit, that you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. And that is why I'm the first presidential candidate to say we're going to end affirmative action in America, once and for all. It is a cancer on our national soul, and we're going to end it. Being an American, what does it mean? It means you believe in ideas like the rule of law. That, you know what, I'm going to say it, as the kid of immigrants, people like my parents who came to this country, who crossed oceans to be part of this country legally, came through the front door, made their contributions, raised 2 kids, both of whom went on to found companies that helped thousands of Americans, who taught their kids that, yes, every decision you make in life involves a trade-off, involves a sacrifice, that entering a marriage, this is my wife Apurva here, by the way, she's joining us too, right? We teach our kids this. Can you stand up for a second, Apurva? We'll call you back. Entering a marriage involves a sacrifice. We have 2 children, they'll join us. Having children involves a sacrifice. But you can make that sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. That's what my parents taught us. We should want more immigrants like them, like Apurva's parents legally who come here. But that also means saying no, without apology, to anyone whose first act of entering this country is a law-breaking one. That is not xenophobic, that is not racist, that is what it means to be an American. Okay? Means you believe in free speech and open debate, that you get to speak your mind, and you do, and you do, and you do too, as long as I get to in return. That's the bargain of what it means to be American, because our founding fathers knew it. James Madison on down, before him even Thomas Jefferson waxed eloquent about it. He's my favorite one. Okay. They knew that free speech is a precondition for truth in America. You think about those school closures 2 years ago. You think we would have closed those schools in this country if we had been allowed to say that we shouldn't close those schools in this country, right? We wouldn't have. You think we would have waited 3 years before we woke up to the fact that that virus started in a man-made lab in Wuhan if we had been allowed to say that the virus started in a lab? I'm not making this stuff up. You couldn't say it. They'd delete your accounts if you said that, right? Free speech is not some, I mean, I went to good colleges, thank God to my parents giving me the education I did. This isn't some liberal arts luxury, though. Free speech is a precondition for truth. I'll tell you this, free speech is a condition for peace in America. right? Because you tell people they cannot speak, that is when they scream. You tell people they cannot scream, that is when they tear things down. And one of the things I love about Moms for Liberty is nobody's going to tell you that you're not going to speak. You will be heard. That is what it means to be American, okay? You practice what you preach. I love that. That's good. Means you believe in ideas, radical ideas, okay? Ones that our founding fathers had. A radical idea that I have as a citizen. That the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Not this bureaucracy that actually runs the show today. That's the biggest myth in American democracy, is that we actually elect our leaders. We don't. We go through the motions. The real people who run the show are part of an acronymous 3-letter alphabet soup in the federal government. So I think it's going to take an outsider to do this, but I've said, you know what? We're not just going to reform that administrative state, right? Let's just take the Department of Education. I'm not going to put a nice person on top of it, Betsy DeVos or somebody else, and say change some things up until the next guy comes along and then it's back to normal. That doesn't work. The only answer when you have a rot that runs that deep is that you shut it down. And so I've said we will shut down the U.S. Department of Education, which should have never existed in the first place. And by the way, the $83 billion a year that they spend, I so appreciate the work that moms across this country have done over the last year at the school board level. Now it's like a game of football. You guys throw the pass. Now it's up to me, if I'm your next president, to catch that and take it to the end zone. You want to know why those school boards are doing it in many cases? Because the federal government says you can't get the money unless you adopt these toxic race and gender ideologies. So $83 billion a year spent on that. If we shut it down, you take 25% of that money. We've done the math on this. 25% of that. You put 3 armed security guards in every school across this country. That is how you protect our children, actually. We will not tolerate another school shooting in this country. It is unacceptable. And that is how you protect children. Okay, and by the way, they tilt the scales, too, towards 4-year gender studies majors in California without actually doing a thing to help people who want to go through vocational training to become a plumber or a mechanic or a welder. Will ever wonder why it's hard to find somebody to actually get a job done and get what you pay for? So that's the Department of Education. You could take me an hour on that, but put that to one side, okay? It goes for the administrative state more generally. All right, if you're going to put me in that White House as your next president, and I can't work for the federal government and collect a paycheck at the teat of the public fisc for more than 8 years, and I think that's a good thing, then neither should any member of that federal bureaucracy that reports back into me. That's a simple rule of the road. And I'll tell you, I understand the Constitution as a student of the Constitution, but this view I'm sharing with you comes from my view as a CEO. Okay, this is a CEO's understanding of the Constitution. If somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them because you're responsible for what they do without having any authority to change it. And here I am, the fool running for the White House, to be a puppet that sits on top of them? No. We will run the federal government in the way the Constitution empowers the U.S. president to run the executive branch of the government. Thank you. So the next time a Merrick Garland or an Anthony Fauci or a James Comey reaches beyond their constitutionally ordained scope, we don't just complain about it. We do what the U.S. Constitution empowers the U.S. president to do. You fire them. You fire the legions of people under them and the managerial industrial complex around them. You don't just drain the swamp, you gut that swamp, okay? These are the things we can do. This is what it means to be American. And if we do these things, if we get that right, do I see my little man? Oh, thank you. We've just got to welcome them here. They're behaving themselves so well on this trip. We'll tell you. Apurva, we'll call you up later and we'll continue the chat. All right, so we're doing it for their generation, okay, by the way. You know, I was born, I told you 1985, I'd been born 20 years later. I don't think my dream would have been possible, not in the same way. Our kids' generation, they're young, but our nieces and nephews in the same generation, they're now the grandkids of immigrants who came to this country. So the funny thing, there's a funny thing that happens when you go 3 generations down. My parents' generation, they're the ones who actually went through the real hardship. Okay, packing their bags, going to a foreign land somewhere, no internet, different culture from what they grew up in, but they came here with a mission on their own choice, on their volition. Okay, they went through hardship, they weren't the victims. They taught us then that story. They say hardship is not the same thing as victimhood. Hardship is what teaches you who you really are, okay? So grow up from it. That's the household we were raised into. Funny thing is happening with my kids' generation. They're taught to now, the way they describe themselves, their cousins who are a little bit older into their teenage years, they're taught to describe themselves as persons of color, right? A term that we never used before. It's a diverse range of cultures you amalgamate into one category, designed to be in opposition to the white category or whatever. So first of all, it's hostile, but second of all, you're taught to see yourself as a victim. Ironically, when you weren't the generation that's actually going through the hardship. God bless the American dream. That's why my children are so much better off than my parents ever were. And yet we're the one teaching them to see themselves as victims. So we're doing it for their generation, and everything we're talking about, keep that in mind. If we revive what it means to be American, right, with those basic ideals I talked about. This isn't controversial stuff. These aren't Republican ideas, really. These aren't Republican, Democrat ideas. They're basic American ideas. If you ask most of your neighbors, even your independent neighbors, unaffiliated, even some of your Democrat neighbors, do you believe in the rule of law and merit and free speech and self-governance over aristocracy? Most of you suspect that they agree with you, okay? They agree on the basic rules of the road. Maybe they disagree on corporate tax rates, but they agree on the basic rules of the road. And we're almost sure about that, but we can't quite be sure anymore because we don't feel free to talk about it. Right? So once we start talking openly again, good things happen. We rediscover who we are. And then once we've done that, then we can stand up to the actual threats we face on the global stage. Top of the list for me is Communist China. Okay. The reason the next president, if you put me in that office, I'm going in eyes wide open. Thank you for that, brother. I appreciate that. And we're ready for it. We're going in eyes wide open. My job will be more difficult than my hero, Ronald Reagan, who in 1980, he faced a tough task, but still the Soviet Union never put the shoes on our feet and the phones in our pockets. Today, we rely on our enemy for our modern way of life. You want to know the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson would have signed if he were alive today? That is the Declaration of Independence that I will sign. It is the Declaration of Independence from Communist China. The time has come to declare independence as Americans. Okay? Thank you. There are some easy things we can do. It's not all of it's so hard. Unshackle ourselves from the climate cult that holds us in a straitjacket while leaving China untouched. That's easy to do. Use every financial lever available to hold China accountable for unleashing hell on the world with the biggest pandemic in a century that killed millions of people. This is not hard, even kicking China out of the World Trade Organization. These are the easy steps, but you know what? If we want to get this job done, you need a president who is willing to go the distance and to do the hard things. The hard thing is to be willing to tell most U.S. businesses that you will not expand into the Chinese market unless and until the CCP reforms its behaviors. You are an affiliate of the CCP. You will not buy land in this country until the CCP reforms its behaviors. Okay? This will not be without some cost. I'm going to be very honest with you. Okay, this will involve some sacrifice. But it's like what my parents taught me. You can make a sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. That is this thing we call America, right? And here's the secret in foreign policy. Here's how it works. It's just not that different from business, where I've had success as well. You can actually avoid having to make a sacrifice if you're actually willing to make one. Right. A little more Churchill, a little less Chamberlain. That's what we need. Think on the time scales of history rather than on the time scales of quarterly earnings reports or actually election cycles. Yeah. That's what we need. You're going to need a spine and fortitude in that White House. We can do it if we rediscover who we really are. We have celebrated our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all the ways we're really just the same as Americans, bound by a common set of ideals. I believe deep in my bones those ideals still exist. We just need to rediscover them. I'm an unapologetic America First conservative. I will not apologize for that. Thank you. I am. And we in the America First movement, let's be really honest with it, we're just using the Republican Party as a vehicle to advance our agenda. Let's call that out for what it is. But to put America first, we need to rediscover what America is. Okay? Our diversity is not our strength. Our strength is what unifies us across that diversity. Because think about it with me for a second. Okay? Without that, look, I'm looking around the room. I'm glad we have some different shades of melanin. Right? I brought one of them. Okay? That's good. You got a few different genders in the room. Two of them. Two of them. Okay? So that's good. That's nice. We're capital D diverse. You know what I say to that? So what? Exactly. If there's nothing that actually unites us across that diversity. Without that, we're just a different looking group of two-legged higher mammals walking that geographic space, not that different from a bunch of hogs we saw in Iowa, doing what our iPhones told us to do on a given day. Okay, we have iPhones, they don't. So what if we don't believe in something higher that brings us together? We put it at the bottom of our coins for a reason. E pluribus unum. From many, one. That's the dream that won the American Revolution 250 years ago. That is the dream that reunited us after the Civil War 160 years ago. That is the dream that won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is the dream that still, yes, gives hope to the free world as we know it. And if we can revive that dream over fractious group identity and grievance, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we will revive to save this great nation. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Let's have a conversation tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, brother. Thank you.
Good on you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. We've got questions.
I think you're uniquely positioned. You're uniquely positioned because of how you made your money in pharma to explain to the American people that the killing at Nashville, the killing at Louisville, starting 24 years ago Monday with Columbine, is driven by SSRI antidepressants, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There's massive evidence of this. The Scientologists with the Commission on Human Rights have been talking about it. Tucker Carlson talked about it last summer. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been talking about it. We are turning a subset of SSRI recipients into sociopaths who become Manchurian candidates, and they walk into schools. They shot up Highland Park, Jews in northern Illinois. A man walked into a market in Buffalo. Uvalde, Texas. These are young people who've been fucked up by the pharma industry, and their minds have been destroyed, and they've been turned into Manchurian candidates. And I believe God has anointed you to be the guy who calls it out. And if you do that, you might become president of the United States.
Thank you for that question. And it's a deeper problem with drug use in this country, right? So there are many drugs, and the funny thing is, the parallels. And you're right. I didn't tell you. I'll tell you about my background, guys. But I had my first big success in this country when I founded a biotech company. I built that company as CEO for 7 years, and we worked on a number of medicines that actually. It is a corrupt, bureaucratic industry. I will tell you, I've seen it firsthand. They make a lot of mistakes. One of the mistakes they made is actually they failed to treat real diseases that actually cause real suffering even when they could, because they're lemmings to head in the directions that you talked about, another antidepressant that you flood the market with, right? Because that's little pixie dust. We know that there's going to be an addiction problem in this country. We fuel that. So the drugs we worked on, to keep it on the positive side here, one is actually a life-saving therapy for 20 kids a year. It's not that many of them, right? It's not by numbers. It doesn't add up to the big pharma math for being a blockbuster drug. And it's not a blockbuster drug, but it's one that mattered. 20 kids a year are born with a genetic condition where 100% of those kids die by the age of 3. The drug we worked on, it was a therapy. A majority of those kids now live lives of a more normal duration, of potentially a completely normal duration. Worked on drugs for prostate cancer, for endometriosis, for uterine fibroids, for psoriasis. All these are FDA-approved products that I had the privilege of overseeing during my tenure as a biotech CEO. And I mention this because I come from a place that values science. My wife, Apurva, you know, come here for a second and talk about the answer to this one, and we'll take the Q&A together. Why don't we do that if the little men are okay? As long as the little men are doing all right here. Apurva's a throat surgeon. She helps people who can't swallow actually swallow, is one of the leading people in the country to do that. So we believe in the importance of science and innovation to solve problems, but we actually have an observation to make. The difference between the legal drug industry and the illegal drug industry is less than you'd imagine. Yes. Right? In both are monopoly industries, right? In one case, both are government-created monopolies. One, we have government prohibitions, I think for good reasons, on the use of illicit drugs like fentanyl, which is now raging across this country like an epidemic. In the other case, you have a patent system, which, again, our founding fathers put in there for a good reason. But both are profitable industries, and both, I think, have the sins of a profitable industry that go back to actually that which allows them to print the money tomorrow, regardless of the effects it's going to have in the long run. And a big part of the role of putting the right leadership in charge in Washington, D.C., is to wake up to that problem, even against the backdrop of a lot of financial constraints that'll hold you back. One of the things that we're in a privileged position to have been able to do in this race is that we didn't do the thing that you're supposed to do as a political candidate running for president, which is to carry a hat in hand, ring a tin can, asking donors for permission to run. Because of what this country gave us, we were able to put an 8-figure check of our family's money to start this off and then take 20,000 small dollar donors that lifted this up. So that's why we're speaking truth about these issues. Now, this reminds me, thank you very much for saying that, sir. Now, this reminds me, this is a good moment where I'm going to continue taking Q&A, but there's one person who, if he's still here, I actually wanted you to hear from tonight. We was just talking to him before he came in. If Derek is here, is Derek in the room? Mr. Kidd is over there. Is he? Oh, there you are. Do you want to come up here for a second? Because it's not just SSRIs. I want to take a minute here to talk about a solvable epidemic, a drug epidemic in this country. I want to talk about how we're going to do it, but we were so moved by Derek's story. Some of you may know Derek. We want to give you the floor actually to share that story, and then we'll talk about how we're going to solve it.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate any opportunity I get to share my family's story. I'll make this quick, though, because I enjoy listening to you speak. And I'm glad you brought your kids, because they're the whole reason that we do this. Mm-hmm. So my son passed away 2021 from a fentanyl overdose, poisoning, whatever you want to call it. He was a multi-sport athlete, good in school, went to church, played saxophone. I mean, he was a great kid. It was unexpected. I found him one morning And, you know, that thrust me into a world that I was unprepared for. And I started on this journey and ended up where I am now, and I'm nowhere near where I need to be. He was somebody that everybody wanted to be friends with. He was somebody that he just had the biggest heart in the world. And I think that, you know, when we talk about drugs, there's a stigma there. And that's what set me down this path, because I started to do my research and I realized, you know, my son took headache medicine, he took stuff for anxiety and depression, and I won't tell you all the stuff that he went through, but he's the poster child for what's going on in this country right now. Took pain medication. He got rid of that because it was not sitting well with him, and somebody introduced him to Percocet, fake Percocet, and that's what ended his life. As I started to dive into this, I realized that it had less to do with drugs and more to do with mental health. And I started to join these groups, and there were dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of kids that were being killed. And it's the mental health portion that we need to address. The drugs have always been here, the drugs are going to be here, and I hope to God that you can limit that. But they're still going to be here, so we have to address things on the other side of things. Our kids are being destroyed. We touched on social media a little bit. There's a lot going on in this country that we need this man to address for us. So I appreciate you attacking that.
Thank you for sharing Sebastian's story. We hope that something like this can never happen again in our country. It's happening every day. About 200 people, I just want to make this real for you. Sebastian's Story, that's his son. 200 every day. Every day in this country due just to fentanyl. And how does it come across? So it's actually pressed illegally into some of those pharmaceuticals that supposedly, where's our FDA that makes it 10 years long and $1 billion to develop a medicine asleep at the switch, allowing actually this to happen in our country. What I've said is, look, if we can use our military to secure somebody else's border in God knows where across the other side of oceans, we can use the military to secure our own border in this country. That is how you can end the supply problem of a fentanyl epidemic that's raging across this country like wildfire. If we can do it to al-Zawahiri or bin Laden or Soleimani, I think it is a legitimate, morally, ethically, legally justified use of military force to say that we will annihilate the drug cartels south of our own border. That is what you expect of a commander-in-chief whose military has a top job of, who would have ever thought, protecting Americans here on American soil. Thank you. I refuse to be a bystander just watching this happen and accepting that as a status quo. Now, Derek's right. There's two sides to this. There's a demand side issue too. And that we have to have the courage to deal with a mental health epidemic that's raging across the country like an epidemic of its own. Spreads faster than COVID-19 if you measure it, okay? Part of that is the psychological moment we live in. I said we're hungry for a cause. We tell young people they can't express themselves. Combine the two, it's a force. But a lot of this is amplified by social media in our country. Yeah. So I say that if you're not old enough to smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18, you're not old enough to have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21, then I don't think you should be old enough to use an addictive social media product by the age of 15 or 16 either. That's something we can actually draw the line on. And that's not a Republican idea or a Democratic idea. It speaks to a problem we have in this country and an expectation that leaders actually solve those problems. Yep. I'm going to use this as a moment to also touch on a different way that mental health epidemic manifests itself in the epidemic of gender dysphoria in our country. Right, for most of our history, you could talk about the science of it. Look at the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual for Psychiatric Diseases. For most of our history, we have treated gender dysphoria as what it is. It's a mental health disorder. When you think your gender does not match your biological sex, and you're a kid saying it, you're not crying out for a gender-affirming surgery and chemical castration. which is the way we treat them today. You are crying out for help. You're saying that something's gone wrong in my life, and I need your help. Somebody, some adult in that room, help me out of what I'm facing. I had a young woman named Chloe. You guys may know Chloe. I met her last week, and her friend Katie, too. These two young women, they're so brave to share their story. They both underwent double mastectomies. Katie's case, she underwent a hysterectomy. She will not have children. They both went through chemical intervention. They will never be the same. They regret those decisions because they were kids, 13 years old in Chloe's case, crying out for help, and nobody answered their call. Instead, we cut off their breasts. If you're not willing in this country, there isn't a state in this union, actually, that allows you to get a tattoo, a body-altering change to your body by the age of 18. Why? Because we don't want kids to make a decision that they will regret later in life. Now, one of the 50 states in the union allows it. We should not allow somebody who's under the age of 18 to undergo genital mutilation or chemical castration. I will see that through as president, and I will not apologize for it. That is not transphobic. That is actually what it means to be compassionate. Okay, affirming someone's confusion is not compassion, it is cruelty. And so I don't fixate on this issue because, it's an issue that's raging across the country right now, like an epidemic. It's a symptom of this deeper mental health epidemic in our country. It manifests itself in that way. And that mental health epidemic itself is a symptom of our deeper loss of purpose in America. Right? I used this analogy at the faith event yesterday. I'll share it with you all. Some of you may have been there. I'll share it with you again nonetheless. We're like blind bats flying around in a cave, lost, figuring out where we are in that abyss. And the way it works with a bat is it sends out a signal. It's a sonar, echolocation they call it. It bounces off something that is true, and then something that is fixed. And then it says, okay, this is where I am. That's what we do. We send out a signal and says, hey, there's the family, the two parents who brought me into this world, the spouse to whom I married, the children who I brought into this world. Bounces back and tells me, this is where I am. This is who I am. Bounces back off of my belief in a one true God. Bounces back and tells me, this is where I am. I'm a citizen of this nation. I'm not some vague global citizen. I'm a citizen of this nation. Something that is true bounces back, tells me this is where I am. Something that I'm proud that I created, I worked hard to create in this world, bounces back, tells me this is where I am. You want to know what's happening today? Diagnosed mental health illness or not, it's actually far more prevalent than we admit. What's happening is we send out those signals and then nothing comes back. And so we're lost in that cave. We're lost in that desert. And then we say we want to bend the knee to something. Okay, when we said in God we trust, the opposite of that is in government we distrust. We bend our knee to a government, to a climate religion, to a transgender religion, even worse, to drugs. That will satisfy our short-term purpose for a serotonin hit, not knowing that in some cases it will leave us more harmed in the long run, in some cases for a Percocet contaminated with fentanyl. A child who lost his life in this country who never should have if the rest of us as leaders were doing our jobs. And what you deserve, what we deserve, is leaders who are unafraid to step up and take on not the easy things but the hard things to actually solve those problems. And I just want to say one more time, Derek, when you came in, your story touched me. We talked before we came in here. Thank you for sharing it with the rest of us, and may it be an inspiration to make sure that other kids in this country can be protected in a way that makes sure that what happens to them is never what happened to Sebastian. Thank you for sharing that story again. Thank you. We'll open it up to some more questions. Thank you. Please.
Watched your interview with Don Lemon, your exchange.
Thank you.
I didn't feel sorry for Don Lemon. I watched it 5 or 6 times. I go, that's so good. I'm going to keep watching it because it was like, and if that's what you can do to the people that are oppressing our great America, then you're a champion for that.
Thank you.
I want to ask you, my wife and I, we had kids your age. And we are, I heard a couple of maybe the senior citizen ladies, he sure does seem like a nice young fellow. So, how do you say like at 37, you feel like you have the age, the experience, I think in Iowa we are a gray population. So how do you address the people that say, he sure is a nice young fellow?
I say thank you for that. I say thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'll tell you, when they, I'll tell you two things about that. There's two questions in there. One is I think we need to debate the other side more. Actually, when they give you lemons, you squeeze them, you make lemonade, right? So that's kind of what I like to do there. But I think that, look, if I'm going to ask you for permission to sit across the table from Xi Jinping, stare him down and tell him we're declaring independence so that he actually folds, I better be able to talk to Don Lemon or NBC News or college campuses across this country, right? That's table stakes, right? And so whoever comes through here running for president, asking you for that same piece of permission, push them on that. Okay, if they've said that they're not going to go to it's true in our race. It's true in our party. There are candidates who say they won't go to a college campus. I went to New England College last week when we were in New Hampshire. They told me they were presidential candidates that didn't want to show up, and I know why, because they got the kinds of questions that I did. Maybe you can be a governor, maybe you can be a foot soldier, but if you want to be the president of the United States on the global stage, you better be ready to actually have a spine of steel here at home, because otherwise we're not going to trust you abroad to be able to get that job done. And in some ways that relates to the answer to your second question. Okay? The conversation we had when we decided in December of this year, we declared by February, but it was really only, it was only honest to God in December that we really decided we were doing this. Is Apurva asked me a question. I'm going to give you the mic in a second here. Because I think you have more to say on this than I do, actually, about what we tell our kids. She said, aren't you going to be better at this 20 years from now? Right? Because there's a lot of things I do now as a 37-year-old that I wasn't doing at the age of 17. Aren't you going to have more experience to actually run the country? I thought it was a good question. It made us pause for a good amount of time. Think about, okay, there are other ways to have an impact. But I think that the moment we live in now actually calls for somebody who's totally outside of that system. Okay, you want to actually reform the system. It's not going to happen incrementally. I think it's got to happen, A, by an outsider, but B, somebody who has fresh legs. Okay? 8 years from now, I will not be the same person that I am today, especially if you all put me in that White House, okay? I'll have a few more wrinkles, gray hairs, maybe a few more pounds, jaded, cynical. It's going to be a hard job. We're going in eyes wide open, right? And you know what? I'm just going to be really honest with you. He's a friend of mine, and he's in this race too. I think Donald Trump is not the same person that he was 8 years ago, just as I'm not the same person 8 years from now that I will be today. But at a certain point, the way it works in this country, you pass on the American dream is you do your part, you pass the torch on to that next generation, and 8 years in, I'll hope to pass that torch on to somebody else from the next generation to carry it on. Because none of us is going to do it ourselves, but we live in a moment where we have a chance to pass this message on to the next generation of Americans. Right? We don't want to just be running from something. We want to be running to something. Okay? The left gives you a narrative of what they're running to. Race, gender, sexuality, climate. Here's my vision of where we're running. We're running to a different vision of our identity. The individual, the family, the country, and God. Okay, that's an actual vision, not just being anti what the left stands for. This is what we actually stand for. And I think we will take that America First agenda further than Donald Trump did if we can do it based on moral conviction, moral authority, and first principles, not just vengeance and grievance. I'll tell you this about this. I told you I'm an America First conservative. America First does not belong to one man. It doesn't belong to Trump. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you. It belongs to the people of this country. And I want to, in good conscience, be able to look my sons in the eye and to tell them, when we have a president of this country, that I want you to grow up to be like him. Okay, we could talk about family values till we're blue in the face or talk about God. I want to be able to say that in good conscience. Last time I probably could have said that was with Ronald Reagan in that office. And we will govern and lead this country, holding ourselves to a standard. You hold us to the standard that you're able to look your kids in the eye and tell them the same thing in good conscience as well. That will allow us to go even further with that America First agenda than any president in recent history has. That's why we're actually in this, because as a millennial reaching that next generation, I think we can not only set the example, but bring them along with us in a way that we're not heading to some national divorce. We're actually heading to a national revival. We're not a nation in decline. We're just a little young, going through our own version of adolescence, figuring out who we really are. I think maybe it will take somebody who's able to see that to actually leave us united as one nation under God on the other side of it. I want to give Apoorva a chance to share her perspective.
First of all, thank you for two things. One, for having us. Two, for having a playground right there. You guys are moms, you know what to do. I appreciate it. So, I met Vivek when I was 22 years old. He was 26. I was a med student. He was a law student. And, he wasn't talking about the things that most people our age talk about. He wasn't talking, I don't think he was even on Facebook at that time. He didn't know what Instagram was. He didn't know, he didn't care about, he likes sports. He's a big Bengals fan, but that's not gonna get me. What he cared about, what he wanted to talk about on our first date, was, why do you think people are making such a big deal about the climate? How can we create justice in our system for people who want to get ahead and have it be fair? He was kind of a weird guy. I love him. I signed on for this. But he has been passionate and obsessed about this for as long as I can remember. And to be honest, you ask his parents this, they would tell you the same thing. This was a 8-year-old, 9-year-old who's always been thinking about this. So yes, I know this guy, he's young. He's young, we're young. But I think that's our privilege in a lot of ways. We need someone who is young. We need someone who people can't just dismiss as a boomer. We need to respect our boomers. We are the greatest generation. We are so grateful for that. We need someone who has respect for our elders. Yeah. We need someone who has respect for the people who have come before us, for true wisdom. And we need someone who can actually set that example for young kids. Say, hey, just because you're young does not mean that you are entitled to be dismissive. That's become, at least that's my problem. That's what I try to teach in our children. Our 3-year-old, every once in a while, they'll try to test your limits. and you, right? Every 2 minutes. And it's about teaching them respect. And that is something, at least I think, we need to start doing as a nation again. Yeah. Is respecting wisdom. And you kind of need someone young to make it cool again. Yeah. So we're here saying, let's make respect, let's make history cool again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You should just ask her question.
I think so too. I think so too. You stand up here. Let's go to the back.
That you want to go back to God and that there's one true God, and I wasn't at the religious thing that we were, so I'm just wondering in your mind who this God is that you talk about, and to you, who is Jesus, and what is your relationship with the God that you mentioned?
Sure. So we are Hindus. We're practicing Hindus, and both of us were raised in a Hindu household. I actually went to Catholic school, 9th through 12th grade. I had a great experience. St. X High School in Cincinnati. Actually, I'm still on the board, although they gave me a leave of absence to run for president, so that was nice of them. But actually, I'll tell you something about that experience that was really meaningful to me. That was the first time I read the Bible, was in 9th grade. And it was different from the other kids, because I was the lone Hindu. I think it was probably the lone non-Catholic, certainly non-Christian kid in that school. And I valued it. Right? If I'd gone to a Hindu school for high school, I'd have been doing what the other kids in the class were doing, just rolling their eyes and, okay, I've seen this stuff, blah, blah, blah. To me, it meant something to me. And I think that one of the things I've realized is it's just a historical fact. I mean, it's not like a debatable idea. It's just a historical fact that America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And we should not apologize for that. We should be proud of it.
Yeah, amen.
But I'll tell you something about our faith is that we're grounded in those same principles. Right? The family, we say it almost in exactly the same way. You experience the love of God when you experience the love of your family first. Purva mentioned a word that's bandied around a lot these days, privilege. Each of us separately had that ultimate privilege of two parents in the house with a focus on God and a focus on education. So that's what we're giving our children too. This idea of equality, right? We throw it around a lot. It's in the Constitution. We pretend like it's a secular value. It's not. That equality is grounded in a moral worldview. We are equal in the eyes of each other. We say in the Christian tradition because we're equal in the eyes of God. The way we say it in the Hindu tradition is we are all equal because God resides in each of us. But it's the same thing, we're just saying it in a different way. And I think that my appreciation for the role that Jesus plays to me is the way we say it is he is the manifestation of that true God. Okay? When we've been through some, and our family's been through some personal, everyone goes through their struggles, so we don't expect you to, cry a tear for us over it. We've been blessed with two beautiful children, but our first attempt or first time conceiving a child did not end in a successful birth of our child. And that was difficult for us. But our parents, when we told them that news, both of them, each of them, my parents and Apurva's parents, the closest place each of them happened to be. Her parents were on vacation in Italy. My mom had just arrived in New York City. Both of them walked into a church and prayed because that was the nearest house of God they were able to find. And that's the way we were raised, on the same values, saying the same thing. Yes, we believe in one true God. But we say it, and we're trained to say it in a slightly different way, and that's what we authentically pass on to our own kids as well. Now that I'm running for president, we each have had our different phases of our lives. We're trying to travel together as much as possible. There are phases of Apurva's training where I, was the principal parent who was at home while she was in residency. I think now Apurva's bearing that responsibility. Our son's actually turning 3. If there's one between the two of us who's actually on the front lines of instilling God into his life, it's Apurva. I'm going to follow his advice. You keep taking these, yeah. You say something about what it means to us.
So yes, we are Hindus. We have a shrine in our house, and every morning we pray to it, and every evening we pray to it. And that's how I grew up. My dad is also a surgeon, and every morning before he went to operate, he thanked God and prayed for strength to be able to do the right thing and to keep his patients safe. And every evening when he came home, he would do the same thing. He would say, "Thank you, God, for letting me take my patients through this and for having them be okay." And you grow up with that. And I was mentioning a little bit about respect. Everyone goes through this when they're a teenager, when they're in college. You think you're smarter than everyone. And I don't speak for Vivek maybe a little bit. Everyone thinks that, does God really exist? Because I'm learning in school, all this stuff, I don't see room for God in what we're learning in science class. I didn't want to be a chump. Everyone's acting like, everyone's got different gods. How can it all be true? It can't all be true. There's something's going on. I don't quite buy into this. But you know what? I took all the biology. I took all the physics. I went to medical school. There is God. There is room for God in our science. There is nothing that explains the miracle of my being able to find this man, who I think is my soulmate. He is my soulmate. I know he's my soulmate. For us being able to have these two amazing children, there's nothing in science that explains how amazing that is.
That's right.
And science doesn't try to. True science is humble. Science is a way of learning about the world, but there are some things that are just unknowable.
Right.
And now, every morning when I wake up, I thank God for my wonderful family, for the ability to do what I do. And every night, I still thank God. And you know what? Thank God that my parents showed us that example, because we all come around. A lot of us will come around, and you need to have some miracles in your life to be able to see that. So that's the same thing I teach our son when he's going down. Like I was saying, he every night when we go down, he'll say, because he doesn't want to go to sleep, like most kids, he's like, you're going to close the door and you're going to leave me all alone. And at the first couple of nights, I was like, well, I guess I'm here for 2 more hours. But then I realized, you know what, Garthik, you're not alone. You're never going to be alone. A, because we're going to be downstairs. B, because God is with you, always with you, and you will have that strength no matter what. And you know what? Now it's a lot faster. But that's what it is. They understand. He sees that, and he understands that there is something out there who's taking care of him, and this doesn't just have to be us. And I hopefully, when he grows up, he'll be able to see the same thing. When he and his little brother grow up, they'll be able to see the same thing. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to just address one more thing direct, because this is my sense from the event even yesterday, right? And the people I met afterwards. I understand that it may be a challenge to say that we're asking somebody to lead this country out of a morally tortured period. It's really a form of, I talked about the national identity crisis. If we're going to talk about God and talk about it openly, let's call out what we see. There's a form of spiritual warfare playing out on the American terrain. Okay, it's just truth. We're going to speak truth. So let's get real, okay? In that context, on one hand, I answer your question. I'm 37 years old and asking you to put me in the White House to sit across the table from Xi Jinping. You better be darn sure that that's a better idea than putting somebody else who's 20, 30, 50 years, literally 40 years later, right? So, and I told you why we've come to peace with conviction in that actually being not only okay, it's actually the right way to do it. I understand that you will have a really legitimate question of how can somebody who is not himself a practicing Christian lead a Judeo-Christian nation in the face of the threats that we face in this moment of spiritual warfare? That's a fair question. I respect it. I will tell you this. I'm going to be on a very practical note. I don't think there's any other Republican candidate, let alone, certainly not the Democratic Party, but Republican candidate, who is freely comfortable talking about our actual faith, the struggles that brought us to where we are, and the way we pass it on to our next generation. I think part of what makes it easier is, I'm not blaming those guys. It's actually hard to do when you're a self-labeled Christian today. And so when you talk about Moms for Liberty, one of those liberties that is under assault in America today absolutely is religious liberty. It's a war on religious liberty. In the name of secular liberties, we've actually completely infringed on religious organizations' rights to decide who they can and cannot hire into their ranks. They're not just doing it through the front door. They're doing it through the back door with the rise of ESG, saying that, we didn't ban you. We just won't let a bank lend to you if you're on the Southern Poverty Law Center's group for hate group listings. I will tell you this. You put us in that position, okay? I guarantee you we will hold that line firmer than anybody else who wears their Christian mantle on their sleeve, because nobody is going to accuse us of being a Christian nationalist in the process, right? So practically speaking, we will get that job done because we believe in the same values. It's just easier when you're 37 and raised in a Hindu household with a last name that most people have some trouble pronouncing. It's actually, I don't know what the reason is, but for whatever reason is, we're not going to apologize for it. We will hold the line. It may be, and I don't see the other candidates doing it. I see other candidates shying away from God, deflecting questions, and I believe they're true Christians in their own life, but why is it that they have difficulty doing it? I don't know. Yeah. This might be why, but whatever the reason is, when it comes to serving as the leader of the country and reviving God in our culture, I truly believe it. When you have a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead, okay? We've read different parts of the Bible, right? You could think about who God chose at different points in that biblical journey, okay? Cyrus was not a Christian. Whatever helps you make peace with getting to a place of what is right for this country, I believe that we will be able to take that agenda further than anyone has in modern memory. the America First agenda further than Donald Trump did because we're doing it on our moral convictions. And we will protect religious liberty maybe more than any other self-proclaimed candidate in this race will. That's what I will say in response to a fair question is that is what I'll promise to deliver back in return. Thank you for that honest question. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. We'll give everybody, I just want to give everybody a chance. We're going to stick around. Don't worry. We're going to hang afterwards and we'll take all the questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Peterson. I'm a homeschool mom of 4. I have
Yeah.
my youngest has special needs, however, she is in public school. But my oldest, when he was little, you said that you started a biotech company. He was injured by a vaccine. I had no idea. I trusted my doctors, and I knew after it happened that that is what has happened to him. Now we see the COVID epidemic, how they're pushing the COVID vaccine into our schools. What could you do to stop that? Because you have a different perspective, but you can see how many thousands now of children are being injured every day from that COVID vaccine and others. And I think we need to stop it. We need to inform parents of what the truth is, that we need to be informed.
Thank you for sharing your question. I'm sorry for what is your son or daughter who went through that? Your son went through that. I'm very sorry. There's so many hands, I'm gonna give you a quick, direct answer, okay? Answer number 1 is, I am against vaccine mandates. That starts from the federal government. And the second is, I'm against special shields of immunity in general. I'm against a special shield of immunity here. And I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, but there's a special form of liability that the federal government says, particularly for vaccine manufacturers, is actually a special protection that doesn't apply to any other category, not even small molecule drugs. This doesn't make sense. Okay, the fact that somebody could be injured by a cup of Coke or whatever and sue that manufacturer, but somebody can not have legal standing to do the same thing against a manufacturer just because there's a special lobbying protection and it was the product for lobbying is wrong. That's something the president can end to. So those are 2 direct answers to your question. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you. We'll try to go fast.
I'm not twice as old as you are, but please speak about energy and the Green New Deal and all this malarkey. We can't support all these electric cars.
I'm just going to speak some truth here so we don't have to beat around the bush. The climate change agenda is a farce. Say it in so many words. I'll go fast here. The same religion that tells you to cut carbon emissions here in the United States at all cost turns a blind eye as those same carbon emissions shift to places like China. That is a lie, okay, that they tell you that they care about carbon emissions. The same anti-carbon movement that says we have to avoid carbon emissions at all costs will say that they're also against nuclear energy, the best known form of carbon-free energy production known to mankind. So that is why this religion has about as much to do with the climate as the Spanish Inquisition had to do with Christ, which is to say nothing at all. It is an excuse for power, dominion, control, and punishment. That's what this is about. And so we have to recognize that this is a constraint that by design is shackling the United States, designed to actually do what it's supposed to do. This isn't about climate, it's about equity. It's about letting global equity, letting the rest of the world catch up, which we would have never said to through the front door, but for the fact that we have to bow to the new. You don't have Christ, what do you have? You have climate instead. That's actually the problem in the country. So I'm going to also state some facts. And I say, I really don't like to boast about academic accomplishments, but in this context, because they will dismiss, if it was anybody else other than me saying the things I'm going to say. Okay, graduated at the top of my class in molecular biology from Harvard. If it was anybody else say the things I'm about to say, they'll dismiss this as misinformation. They're not going to dismiss me that way, because very few people in this country are going to understand this more deeply than I do. 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. Okay, the best answer to all temperature-related deaths is actually more abundant and plentiful access to fossil fuels. The planet is covered by more green surface area today than it was a century ago. You want to know why? Because carbon is plant food, and they tend to grow when it's a little bit warmer. And the Earth tends to have a system built in for sucking carbon back out of the atmosphere. The best form of carbon capture known to humankind is actually not from humankind, it's from plants. So I could go on for an hour on this stuff, but the climate change agenda is a hoax. It is a farce. It is a farce designed to exercise control over your life. And so you want to unlock economic growth in this country, the easiest thing we can do is embrace some foul language. Drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear. That's actually how you unlock economic growth in this country. And you will, it annoys the heck out of me when I hear Republicans dance around this issue talking about time horizons. Oh, well, isn't that energy transition happening a little bit too quickly? No, it is a farce. There is no energy transition. Electric vehicles, we live in a free country. You want to buy an electric car? Fine, buy an electric car, but do not use my tax money to subsidize somebody else's decision to buy that electric car, because that too is a farce. It is a hoax. So what I've said is this, U.S. President, we're abandoning the anti-carbon agenda. We're not just like tinkering around the edges. We're done. I don't even want to measure carbon emissions. Because the federal government mandates it. I'm serious about this. Through the SEC, the Department of Labor, the EPA, so many administrative agencies have the carbon measurement reporting. I think part of the problem is that then you have a culture that lines up behind it. I will have an executive order on day one that any federal agency that measures carbon emissions or mandates the measurement of it is done doing it. Because we're declaring independence from the climate cult and seeing our way back to truth. That's where I am on that. Thank you.
There are a lot of people that are concerned with the CBDCs that are happening and being foisted upon the American citizens in July. And I am wondering, what would you say for all of us to do about this? And,
Great question.
You know, it's just really concerning.
Yes, so this is a technical issue. I don't know if everyone's aware of what she's referring to. Central bank digital currencies, CBDC. I'm seeing some familiarity in the room. That's good. So there's part of a broader trend in this country. Is anybody here, most of you familiar, any of you, with the ESG movement, what that means in corporate America? So that's been actually my main battle for the last several years. I've actually found my most recent company is a company called Strive that competes directly against BlackRock, offering investment products that allow everyday Americans to tell American companies to actually focus who would have ever thought in profits rather than on social agendas. And so that's been, you know, a success, and I'm trying to drive success through the marketplace. But now they're taking that to the next level. And there's a general rule of thumb. The more boring the term sounds, right? That's why they use acronyms. ESG, now CBDC. The more boring it sounds, the more you have to pay attention. Because it was designed to sound boring for a reason. Okay, so central bank digital currency say instead of actually hard dollars, you just make it like a digital token system. Okay, it's like you're playing in the arcade. You have some points. That's what it is in your bank account. China pioneered this. They pioneered it because they have a social credit system which says that if you say something or do something that the government doesn't like, they can wipe your account clean. Now, in the name of saying that we need to catch up and stay innovative, that's the argument. Say we're going to fall behind China unless we do the same thing. We're now implementing systems like that, first in the UK, and now the first stage of it. And the good news I have for you is what's coming in July is really, thankfully, just a tiny first step. And even if we play this out to January 2025, it's not going to be irreversible damages because we're just going to roll it back as long as we're successful in getting elected. But the real risk is that we will do in this country what China's doing in theirs, using the same toolkit that China's already using. That you say something you don't like. Heck, you show up at a meeting like this one. You're known, you're digitally tracked. You might get some financial penalties in response, right? You might just say, hey, we'll nudge your behavior in a certain direction so you learn next time around that you don't do the same thing. This actually happened in Canada. So this isn't that just distant Chinese stuff. Remember those Canadian truckers, right? They use the financial system to silence them. Notice you don't see those Canadian truckers anymore, right? Don't hear a peep from them. So this is an exercise of a way to exercise dominion and social control. And I think that is why we have to say a hard no to that trend in this country. The way you do it, first of all, less money given to ESG promoting asset managers. I mean, people who, banking institutions that have demonstrated their commitments to values that are antithetical to those on which this country were founded, those that you and I probably share. That's a first line of defense. But a lot of this with currencies, unfortunately, I hate answers that end with the US president has to do it, because I prefer most solutions to be delivered in a decentralized way. Unfortunately, this is one that has to be delivered by the next US president, putting the Federal Reserve back in its place, Part of the problem is you got 22,000 plus people that show up in the US Federal Reserve System when the Federal Reserve's job should be to stabilize the currency. That's it. We need less than 2,000 of them. You get a bunch of people that show up to work, they find things to do. Right? That's why they're coming up with this stuff. So I said we would lay off 90% of the people in the US Federal Reserve, put it back in its place. That's the answer to that question. Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing your spirituality. One of the things that concerns us is artificial intelligence. Our kids are using artificial intelligence to write papers, ask questions, get answers, and we're worried that it's going to be the next God, and
Oh, yeah.
argue, it'll argue against our Christianity or against our faith, and we're very concerned about that. So what are your thoughts with that?
I'm very concerned about it too. I'll start on a lighthearted note, an analogy, but then I'll tell you one of the things I'm concerned about. Actually, it's bending the knee to a new God is actually what I'm concerned about. So anybody here is a tennis fan by chance, a professional tennis fan? Okay, a couple of you. So I am. And one of the things that happened in tennis, in the tennis world of professional tennis in the last several years, was that they got rid of the line judges, the human beings who make line calls. It's all done automated. And the technology that does it doesn't actually see where the ball lands with a camera. It makes an AI-based prediction of where the ball will land, innocent enough, right? This whole example is not some dark story. It's just an example. It makes a prediction of where the ball will land. When the first generation of that technology came out, what you could see is literally on the camera, you could see that it was in, but the AI would call it out, or it was out and the AI would call it in. But there's an interesting trend that happened. In professional tennis, one of the fixtures, right back to John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors, is you argue with the line judge. It was just like part of the sport. But once it was the machine calling it, even if you could see with your eyes that it was wrong, they stopped arguing. Because it's something native in our human impulse that bends the knee to some higher authority. And so I think one of the greatest underappreciated risks of AI is that we'll bend the knee to AI because it's AI. So I've actually gone into ChatGPT myself. I like to play around with this a little bit. Ask them questions about climate change. Like questions about how do we address racial injustice in America. It has like very specific answers, including racial equity programs in hiring, right? Like it literally spits that out as though that's a technical answer. And so what I worry about, among other things, is that you take the kinds of questions that are converting degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius, but apply that logic as though how you fight climate change or address racial inequities is still that type of technical question. That's the number one risk of AI. Number two risk of AI, we already see it. It's not going to be robots with laser eyes. I'll tell you, in some ways, we've already been turned into those robots. I'm not being unrealistic about this, right? The way Twitter or Facebook was supposed to work, and by the way, Mark Zuckerberg was a year ahead of me at Harvard. He founded Facebook a year ahead of me. What was his principal insight? It wasn't a technological one. It was psychological. His first site was Hot or Not. That was the predecessor to Facebook. You know, it sort of takes some different faces from the Harvard directory. It's what it sounds like. And how quickly you click was what it captured. So his insight was that I can make you click on something either slower or faster and use that to gain a window into your soul deeper than you have into your own. And that was the backbone of creating a multi-trillion-dollar industry over the last 20 years. And so that was supposed to be the internet imitating real life in how we talk to each other. You ever notice something in the last 10 years that happened in our country? The conversations that we're having in real life are now imitating the way we have conversations with each other on the internet. Wonder how we get to this polarized place, national divorce, and so on. That is effectively AI training human beings to relate to human beings even in the offline world like we did on the internet. So it's not the internet imitating real life, it's real life imitating the internet. That too is AI, right? Co-opting the way we think. And it's designed, it's like a virus, to perpetuate itself. A virus often perpetuates itself through hosts that are supposed to spread it. That's why it makes you cough. It's like AI. It's like a mind virus that effectively makes you cough and communicate in a way that spreads that mode of communication. So I could go on and on about the risks. Here's what makes it hard. This is what makes it hard. It's the same thing. It's like gain-of-function research, which gave us the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we can now say that near definitively, okay? We banned it in this country. Right? We said no gain-of-function research in the United States. We had a rogue government actor, Anthony Fauci, and people who worked for him, that disagreed with that decision. And they said, we're going to fund it anyway, abroad, where it's not banned. And where did it find itself to? The lion's den, China. Wuhan Institute of Virology gave us a global pandemic in the name of a technology that was supposed to prevent global pandemics. So AI, in the name of fostering human flourishing, has risks that could really impede and, at the extreme, be the end of human flourishing. But here's the challenge, right? We can't just adopt that ban here if it's just going to find its way to China, who's doing the same thing, because then we're in the worst of all worlds, actually. It's kind of like what happened with gain-of-function research. Because then, actually, there's the version of us just being exploited by the Chinese version of it without any defense to it either. So I think this is one of those challenging issues. It's like the mental health epidemic and social media, rises way beyond the partisan tugs of war. And I think we're going to have to, at once, draw a hard line to say that we're not going to shackle ourselves while letting China roam free, but actually have the fortitude to be a global leader using our last remaining economic leverage over China to get the CCP to reform in all kinds of ways, including this one. And then we ensure that we're not engaging in the gain-of-function, pandemic-releasing science advancements that gave us the last global pandemic to give us an unmitigated potential disaster from letting AI run and roam free as well. That's complicated, and here's what I'll tell you. It goes back to your question. It helps to have someone who has an understanding of these things, right? I founded a biotech company. We have actually used AI to aid in the discovery of drugs. You cabinet, you keep it just there. I mean, that's about as benign as it's going to get in contrast to mediating how human beings talk to one another. But we live in a moment where you can't, and I think this is why it's got to be an outsider, but an outsider that has specific understanding of the unique issues of our time, okay? And has enough curiosity to actually get into it, because especially with the corrupt system, the influence of money on politics being what it is, if you're just relying on your advisors and then you're just going through the motions, you're just going to carry out the wishes of the people who are really the puppet masters behind the scene. If you have somebody who has their own first personal moral convictions and even knowledge-based convictions, constitutional conviction in the Constitution. Back to what I said, I'm going to fire the people in the federal government. They say there's civil service protections. Actually, it's my personal understanding of the Constitution that says that's wrong. Those are unconstitutional, because this is what Article 2 of the Constitution says. That's what we're going to need in order to actually navigate these threats. This is why, funny enough, I'm actually in favor of Iowa's first in the nation status. Because you all in this room have a sixth sense for that. You're trained to do this. You've been doing it for a long time. You have the antenna to know the difference between somebody who walks in this room and recites what we were told to say 15 minutes before we came here versus someone who has a personal, bone-deep conviction in navigating a complex challenge, okay? Whoever that is, make sure you pick the person who's operating according to their convictions rather than reading what a donor-funded political consultant told them to say. That's what it's going to take to actually navigate the choppy waters ahead of us. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. We'll take a couple more questions and then we'll hang around. I don't want to hold everybody hostage situation here. So we'll take a couple more questions, then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Awesome. So my name's Jesse. The faith, freedom, that stuff, those questions that the good lady down the back here asked earlier are probably the most important things to me, but we've been there, talked about that. Awesome. Perhaps next time you're in Iowa we can chat more about it.
Thank you.
But anyway, I'm an immigrant. Been here 10 years, became a citizen last year. Actually on that day, rolled down to the Republic and but
welcome.
As an immigrant, I'm convinced that I understand the Constitution 100 times better than most Americans. I don't understand. I
believe that.
understand how much power our federal government has when I read that document.
It's unbelievable.
So the question I have is, you talk about getting rid of the Department of Education. Fantastic. That'd be awesome. Let us figure out in Iowa what we want to teach our kids. But I thought I'd ask you, what do you think the federal government's role in America is, and limit it at that?
That's exactly what our founding fathers envisioned. Provide national security, actually fund the few programs that need to be funded, which include actually protecting the nation itself. And I think we're pretty close to that being, you protect Americans from threats abroad. You have a law enforcement apparatus of the limited set of federal laws. That's pretty close, pretty darn close to about it. You might have a couple details around the way. You do have to have a currency, so we need to protect that currency. I said the job of the U.S. Federal Reserve is narrow to stabilize the U.S. dollar. We're just talking about the basics. So you have state, treasury, defense. Defense can sit under state.
Transportation.
No.
Nope. No, it's not the federal government's job. I think you got Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Treasury, state.
Yeah.
And we basically call it a day at that. The administrative state is unconstitutional. The administrative, so I want to say two more quick things about this. Actually, the first comment was really a point. And by the way, you can see this on our website. It's not just the Department of Education. We've delineated, and we're still building the list of agencies we would either shut down and leave shut down, or shut down, and if we're going to have to rebuild them, build them from scratch. On the list is the FBI. Okay, and people get mad when I say that one, but FBI, the IRS, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we've got a whole list of government agencies we will shut down because the administrative state is fundamentally unconstitutional. There's 3 branches of government, not 4. I want to say something about your first comment, though, because everybody in this room should know this. I believe you. What is your name?
Jesse.
And you came from Australia?
Yeah.
Lucky guess. Okay. Okay. So, the Communist Republic of Australia. That sounds about right. Covidistan, Australia. Okay. So here's the thing. I have full conviction what you said is true. So one thing we're struggling with. So I'm going to just share something with you. You're not supposed to do this in an event like this. This is not a presidential platform item. Okay. But it is an idea for how I'm thinking about how we revive capital C citizenship, and I wrote it as a thought experiment in my second book, Nation of Victims, is how do we revive that civic culture in an 18-year-old kid that graduates from college? So here's one way I'm thinking about it. This is a thought experiment. There's all kinds of practical obstacles to make it is a reality. Take the voting age from this country from 18 to 25, but you still vote at 18 as long as they can pass the same test that you passed to become a citizen about the Constitution. Or at least, if not the test, do some service to the country to actually revive that idea of citizenship. There's all kinds of practical pitfalls, but I just think we need to be thinking big. We can't think small. We got to think of capital C citizens, civic duty. That's something we're missing in this country. And if you're going to do your job and come in here, as my parents did, bring that civic lifeblood and breathe some of that back into people in our generation and younger in this country. That'll be the greatest service I think you can do as an American. And I think that the more of us think big about reviving that civic lifeblood, the better off we're going to be in understanding our Constitution. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
CEO question.
Sure.
Okay, so if you have people in your corporation, any of them, that are trying to undermine your company, you're going to fire them.
Yes.
If you're president and you've got Democrat majorities in Congress and the House, you can't fire them. How can you further what you want to do, America's dream, in that situation?
So I'll say 2 things in response to this. The first is, if we win this election in 2024 by such a margin that leaves Democrat majorities in the Senate and Congress, we did not do our jobs right. Okay, so I think there's an opportunity for a landslide, 1980 Reagan-style landslide election in 2024. Reagan led us out of our last national identity crisis in the late 1970s. I think that's the opportunity sitting in front of us in 2024. We make this about whether you're not even Democrat or Republican. Are you pro-American? Do you agree with the basic ideals this country was founded on? Or are you, and it exists, anti-American? Do you wish to apologize for the existence of a nation founded on those ideals? That's not a 50-50 split. That is an 80-20 split in our favor, and even half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. We can bring them along too. That's the formula for a landslide election. So first thing I'm going to say is not going to put ourselves in that position. And I'm in this race because I believe, I'm not blustering, I just think this is true. I think I am the candidate in either party right now who can deliver a Reagan-style, 1980-style moral mandate of a victory. Okay, and I think that's important for seeing this all the way through. But the second point is that, say I'm wrong, 2 years in, 4 years in, 6 years in, things change. I think a president has to be clear-eyed about what the president can do without asking Congress for permission or forgiveness, what the president can do that requires Congress as an authority to pass legislation, and then what the federal government has no business doing, which is best left to the states and the people per the 10th Amendment. So that's actually what we need to keep clear-eyed. And so what you'll notice is if you look at our agenda, most of what we've laid out, most of it, and this is an exception, it's not usually done this way, is not a legislative agenda. It is what the President of the United States can himself do without asking anybody for permission. So when I told you earlier, I'm the first president in U.S. history that said I would do it, would end race-based affirmative action in America. Turns out the president can do that by executive order. You want to know why? Because it was created by executive order. 11246 was the executive order that Lyndon Johnson signed. It's been a cancer on our national soul. I pushed Trump's people on why they didn't rescind it. You know what they said? And I think it's true. It said, this is not a political hill we want to die on, is what they said. So that's why we need a moral mandate to say if we're doing this on principles, we can go further and get it done. Shutting down the FBI, the IRS, the Department of Education, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, this is something the U.S. president can do because other presidents screwed up. They let those agencies talk to Congress, write the language for the budget, ask for permission directly. They played a little trick on Congress because Congress is asleep at the switch. It used to say we may spend this money. The administrative state, the deep state, changed that language to say we shall spend that money. So then when the president tries to say I want to shut you down, the deep state tells the president that no, you can't because Congress tied your hands and said you shall spend that money. CEO, you're saying CEO question. As a CEO running the executive branch of the government, all of those budget requests will run through the White House. We get the language right and say we will ask for permission to spend it, but the language will say may, not shall. And if we want to shut it down, we will see it through and shut it down. And that goes back to why you need your own first personal, deep-seated conviction that this is how we actually need to run the country. And it turns out this is why I'm running for president, rather than being a legislator or continuing to drive change through the market. We live in a moment where somebody with a spine who's willing to exercise executive authority that you give to that person, they can actually make a difference without asking for permission and without asking for forgiveness, to do that without apology. Now, I'll close with this. We're going to stay here and ask and take questions just one-on-one. I want to let people who want to get on with their evening be able to do that, but Apurva and I will be here. Okay? Yes, we are going through our own version of a national identity crisis, but I will tell you this, we've been through it before. It's like I said earlier, we're a little young, on our way to our adulthood. The path to conviction runs through doubt. Okay, I have been through my version of doubt. I'm on the other side of that. I'm at a place of conviction. We are at our place of conviction. And the thing I ask of each of you is that when you are in the thick of doubt of where we are as a country, keep in mind, not in some cheesy politician-y kind of way, but in a way that's just true. Believe with us that our best days are actually still truly ahead of us. And if we gain that conviction given to us by God, that there is a God looking out for us that's guiding us through our difficult times, then have conviction that the country we will pass on to our kids will still be stronger than the one we inherited. I believe that to be true. I believe we can make it so. It's not going to happen because me or somebody else who walks in here asking to be the president says we're going to be some Messiah coming from on high to save us. Doesn't work that way in politics. It is going to happen because each of us does our part. Okay? Just because you elect the right president does not relieve you of the responsibility to keep doing your part too. All we're asking you right now in this primary, in this election, is you do your part and we will do ours. And we will do it in the name of our country. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. God bless our families. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.